When worship turns into war. The Psalms are not all soft melodies and gentle prayers. Some are war cries. Some are shields. Some are flaming arrows launched from the heart of a believer surrounded by darkness. When David sang, he wasn't always in green pastures. Sometimes he was in caves, hunted like an animal, calling out for God to strike his enemies. This is the side of worship we often forget, the side that fights, the side that stands unshaken when the night is thick with fear. The Psalms remind us that prayer is not only communion, it's combat. Spiritual warfare is not a metaphor for ancient Israel alone. The same enemy that opposed David still prowls today, whispering lies, sowing division, seeking to devour. But the same God who armed David's hands for battle and surrounded him with deliverance is still our defender. Psalm after psalm, the Spirit teaches us how to fight, not with swords and spears, but with faith, obedience, and unshakable trust in the Lord. These are battle songs, not lullabies. They are meant to be sung in storms, shouted in valleys, and prayed in the heat of the fight. In this journey, we'll walk through the Psalms that burn with holy fire: Psalm 91, the shadow of the Almighty; Psalm 35, the cry for justice; Psalm 144, the training ground for spiritual battle, and more. Each one is a weapon forged in the presence of God, sharp enough to cut through fear, strong enough to stand against the enemy's schemes. When the Psalms become warfare, worship becomes victory, and every believer learns that the battle is not ours. It belongs to the Lord. Psalm 91, the fortress and the shadow. Psalm 91 is not a gentle suggestion, it is a battle shield. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. This is not poetic comfort alone, it is strategic positioning. The shadow of God is not for those passing by, it's for those who dwell, who stay, who refuse to run to any other refuge. In war, soldiers know the importance of cover. In the Spirit, our cover is the Almighty Himself. His shadow is safety. His presence is an impenetrable fortress. The psalm does not deny the existence of danger, it lists it. The snare of the fowler, deadly pestilence, terror by night, arrows by day, plague, destruction, thousands falling on every side. It paints the reality of battle with brutal honesty. But every threat is met with a greater truth. It shall not come near you. The believer under God's shadow is not promised an absence of war, but the guarantee of survival and victory. The battlefield may be real, but so is the fortress. Psalm 91 also reveals the angelic defense deployed on behalf of God's people. He shall give his angels charge over you, to keep you in all your ways. This is not symbolic, it is heavenly military intervention. When the enemy advances, unseen warriors stand guard. When traps are laid, they are dismantled. When the serpent strikes, it is crushed underfoot. Psalm 91 is the believer's declaration that no weapon formed against them will prosper, not because the enemy is weak, but because the refuge of the Most High is unshakable. Psalm 35, the cry for justice against enemies. Psalm 35 is not whispered, it's shouted from the depths of a heart under siege. Contend, O Lord, with those who contend with me. Fight against those who fight against me. This is the language of spiritual warfare, where the believer calls upon the commander of heaven's armies to take the field. David knew that his true strength was not in his sword, but in God's intervention. This psalm is not about revenge, it's about divine justice, where God Himself steps in to defend His people from deceit, betrayal, and relentless attack. The imagery is striking: God taking up shield and armor, rising as a warrior, pursuing enemies until they are scattered like chaff before the wind. David does not deny his fear or the cruelty of his accusers, but he refuses to fight on his own terms. Instead, he places the battle entirely in God's hands. This is the essence of Psalm 35, handing the case to the judge who cannot be bribed, intimidated, or deceived. It is the cry of one who knows the fight belongs to the Lord. Psalm 35 also reveals the importance of worship in warfare. Even before deliverance comes, David promises, "I will give you thanks in the great assembly. I will praise you among many people." Victory is not just about enemies falling. It's about God's name being exalted. In Psalm 35, the believer learns that true triumph is when justice is served, evil is silenced, and the glory belongs entirely to the Lord who fought the battle. Psalm 144, training hands for battle. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144 begins not with fear, but with readiness. David does not only thank God for victory, he thanks Him for preparation. This is a psalm for those who know that spiritual battles are not won by accident. God is the trainer, the strategist, the one who equips His warriors with skill, discernment, and spiritual resilience long before the fight begins. Warfare is not just about surviving, it's about being sharpened to stand and prevail. David calls God his fortress, his stronghold, his deliverer, his shield, and the one in whom he takes refuge. This stacking of titles is not poetic exaggeration, it is the layering of defenses. In the Spirit, the believer's armor is not just one piece, it is a complete covering. Every name of God is a different aspect of His protection. When the enemy comes, the trained warrior knows exactly where to stand and how to wield the weapons of faith and truth. Psalm 144 also ties victory to blessing. After speaking of battle, David declares his vision of peace. Sons and daughters thriving, barns filled, sheep multiplying, streets free of distress. The goal of spiritual warfare is not endless fighting. It is the restoration of God's order. In Psalm 144, we learn that God does not only rescue His people, He transforms them into disciplined, prepared warriors whose victories bring blessing to the land. Psalm 18, the God who comes down in fire. Psalm 18 is a war epic in poetic form. David begins with love for the Lord, but quickly shifts into a dramatic account of rescue under fire. Surrounded by death, overwhelmed by torrents of destruction, he cries out, and heaven responds. Then the earth shook and trembled. Smoke went up from his nostrils, and devouring fire from his mouth. This is not a distant, passive God. This is the warrior king descending into the battle, His presence shaking creation itself. The imagery is fierce. God riding on a cherub, darkness under His feet, hailstones and coals of fire scattering the enemy. David's deliverance is not quiet. It is violent against the forces of darkness. The same hands that crafted the heavens reach down into the chaos to pull His servant from deep waters. This is the picture of divine intervention in spiritual warfare. Overwhelming power meeting overwhelming need, with the enemy crushed under the weight of God's glory. Psalm 18 also reminds us that victory comes with purpose. God does not just save to comfort, He saves to strengthen. He trains my hands for war, so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. Deliverance leads to empowerment, and empowerment leads to more victories. In Psalm 18, the believer sees that God is not merely a shield. He is the storm that drives the enemy into retreat, the consuming fire that cannot be quenched. Psalm 27, confidence in the day of trouble. Psalm 27 is the anthem of unshakable trust. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? These are not the words of someone who has never seen battle. They are the battle cry of one who has seen the enemy's face and still stands unafraid. David's confidence does not come from his own skill, but from knowing that God Himself is his fortress. When the Lord is the stronghold, fear becomes powerless. The psalm shifts from declaration to strategy. In the day of trouble, seek His presence. One thing I ask, to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. This is not escapism. It's tactical retreat into the ultimate stronghold. In God's presence, the believer is hidden, lifted above enemies, and given a vantage point from which the battle looks different. Worship is not separate from warfare. It is one of its most powerful weapons. Psalm 27 closes with an unyielding command to the soul. Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord. This is the posture of a spiritual warrior, standing firm even when the victory is not yet visible. In Psalm 27, we learn that courage is not the absence of danger, but the unbreakable trust that God's presence is greater than any enemy. Psalm 46, God our refuge in the chaos. Psalm 46 is the song you sing when the world falls apart. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. This is not a promise for calm days. It is a declaration for earthquakes, storms, and wars. The psalmist imagines mountains crumbling into the sea, waters roaring and foaming, nations raging, and yet there is no fear. Why? Because God is in the midst of his people, and where he dwells, destruction cannot win. The imagery changes from chaos to stillness. A river whose streams make glad the city of God. In the middle of battle, God supplies life, joy, and peace that the enemy cannot steal. He does not only shield, he sustains. This is why the psalmist can say, God will help her when morning dawns. Even if the night is long, dawn is coming, and with it, the victory he has promised. The psalm closes with a command from the commander himself. Be still, and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. This is not passive stillness. It is the ceasefire that comes when the king steps onto the battlefield and every enemy bows. In Psalm 46, the believer learns that the safest place in the world is not far from danger, but close to God. Psalm 68, God scatters his enemies. Psalm 68 opens with a battle cry straight from the wilderness days. Let God arise, let his enemies be scattered, let those who hate him flee before him. This is not a request, it's a declaration of what happens when God moves. The psalm portrays him as a divine warrior marching through history, leading his people, crushing oppressors, and lifting up the weary. Smoke vanishes in the wind, wax melts before fire, and so the enemies of God disappear before his presence. The psalm shifts to celebration. God is not only a destroyer of evil, he is a defender of the vulnerable. He is a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, setting the lonely in families and leading prisoners into freedom. Spiritual warfare is never just about defeating darkness, it's about establishing God's justice, healing, and restoration among his people. The victory of the Lord always leaves blessings in its wake. Psalm 68 climaxes with the vision of God ascending on high, taking captivity captive, and receiving gifts from among men. This imagery echoes into the New Testament, pointing to Christ's victory over sin, death, and every demonic power. In Psalm 68, we see the full scope of God's warfare. He rises to scatter the enemy, but he also rises to reign, to bless, and to fill the earth with his glory. Psalm 91, the secret place of protection. Psalm 91 is the soldier's shield and the intercessor's anthem. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. This is not just poetry, it is a battle position. The one who takes refuge in God is hidden under his wings, invisible to the enemy's schemes. Arrows may fly by day, pestilence may stalk by night, but the one in God's presence is untouchable unless he allows it for victory's sake. The psalm lists a barrage of threats: terror, plague, disaster, the fall of thousands. Yet the tone is never fearful, it is defiant in faith. 1,000 may fall at your side and 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. This is the language of a warrior who has seen the battlefield littered with casualties, yet walks forward unscathed, because his commander has declared him under divine protection. Psalm 91 ends with God himself speaking. Because he loves me, I will rescue him. I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name. It is not just about surviving. It is about knowing the one who commands the angels, the one who treads on the lion and the serpent, the one who promises long life and salvation. In Psalm 91, we see that the most secure fortress is not made of stone, it is made of trust in the Almighty. Psalm 149, the two-edged sword of praise. Psalm 149 reveals a weapon many overlook: praise. Let the high praises of God be in their mouths, and a two-edged sword in their hands. This is the fusion of worship and warfare. The psalmist shows that singing to the Lord is not just an act of devotion, it is an act of battle. When God's people lift their voices, chains break, gates fall, and spiritual strongholds crumble under the weight of His glory. The psalm calls the saints to rejoice in their Maker, to dance, to sing with timbrels and harps, not as entertainment, but as a war march. This is praise that executes God's judgment on the nations, binds kings with chains, and carries out the written decrees of the Lord. It's a reminder that worship is not passive. It is a weapon that turns the tide of the fight, releasing God's power into the battlefield. Psalm 149 closes with a bold statement, "This honor have all His saints." Every believer is invited into this kind of warfare, where victory is won not just with swords, but with songs. In Psalm 149, we learn that the mouth of the worshiper can be as deadly to darkness as the blade of a warrior, because when God is exalted, the enemy is silenced.